Okay, let's get right to work here in hour number 3. Glad you're with us tonight. Dr. Bill Deagle joins us this hour. Bill is on every Tuesday of the month, 4 times a month. We're going to talk about a lot tonight, so fasten your seatbelts. First up, a quick review of some of the headlines out of Japan regarding the Fukushima catastrophe, that open, festering, continually contributing source of death to the northern hemisphere and ultimately the southern hemisphere, the wrecked plant at Fukushima. Here are some of the headlines. Journalists on Fukushima bus tour, all of them were told to put their cameras down by the bus driver. Remember, TEPCO and all of its consideration for the media opened the plant, allegedly, for a tour by the press, but they put them all on the bus with super protections, i.e. their full radiation suits and headgear with breathing masks and double filters, didn't let them out of the bus, didn't let them roll down the windows, and told them to put their cameras down when the bus driver was ordered to do so. So TEPCO is not exactly open and forthcoming. By the way, when that bus parked next to reactor number 2 so they could take some pictures, the radiation at that location was 1 sievert an hour. We're allowed in this country 1 sievert a year. They got it 1 an hour. They weren't there for the full hour, but had that bus parked there for 5 hours, they'd be dead. It's not a pretty picture. New map shows cesium-137 blown 900 kilometers from the Fukushima Daiichi plant. 900 kilometers. Plutonium found in all 9 soil samples off Fukushima coast. Will Fukushima $10 trillion catastrophe bankrupt Japan? I'd suggest it will. Fuel from reactors 1, 2, and 3 seem to be leaking from under the buildings. Reports from workers in the plant. It goes on and on. You can see it all right in the center column at rense.com. Here with us to talk about why the children in Fukushima Prefecture aren't growing like they should is Dr. Bill Deagle, MD. Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
Yeah, I'd like to focus first on Fukushima because there's a lot of false scams out there by various media, both in the regular media that mainly ignore issues, or the alternative media that sometimes hype things that they don't understand and then ignore things that are really serious. In other words, you don't need to search around for something that is catastrophic. Fukushima is a third world war without the cities on fire. Now, the radiation effects will cause gastrointestinal syndrome, either an acute syndrome or a chronic syndrome, a CNS syndrome, and a hematological syndrome. And what we're seeing now with these kids, if you look at the article that you posted up, and I've gone back and researched some other evidence, and I have some other articles here, we're going through the National Library of Medicine and Google Search and Google Scholar and others, and I've dug up all kinds of nastiness. And what I found out, in fact, is that they're fully aware in Japan that they have literally cut off the ability of these children to grow, that they're blocking their primarily the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, so it's not going to release growth hormone properly. It'll all radiation, like these isotopes, are going to demineralize these children. So the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to get maldigestion and leaky gut syndrome, and their stress on their central nervous system will prevent them from releasing growth hormone. And the next level of symptoms are hematological, things like acute leukemia, problems with actually inflammatory changes in their blood cells that eventually will cause other kinds of bleeding disorders, like as they get older, polycythemia vera and other things. And then there's going to be a CNS syndrome, which may even be starting already, where people will just start behaving strangely. And in fact, the best way to describe it is decorticate behavior. Now, when someone gets hypoxic or exposed to nerve gas, or they get an extremely stressful situation, let's say at the real high altitude and they're climbing Mount Everest, they act like their cortex is not working because it has to have a lot of oxygen. And when you put extremely high stress, especially over a long period of time, eventually these neurons start to either shut down and go anaerobic, or they die. And so you start getting weird behavior. Now, one of the things that's happening is this, that I read, and I've read through your site and I checked elsewhere, is this race they had that the government actually sponsored through the prefecture of young girls, literally we're going to race.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, a marathon, foot race.
Yeah. Foot race, and they didn't give them any air protection. Now, you have to understand, if you're an elite athlete or if you're a young person and you're exposed to, say, carbon monoxide, say, in a U.S. city, and you run and you've got good high cardiac output, your carbon monoxide hemoglobin will be far higher than somebody who's relatively sedentary that's pushed along the sidewalk in a wheelchair. So if you're breathing radioisotopes, your amount of liters per minute of air you're putting through your lungs is going to mean you're going to absorb a tremendous amount more radiation. So putting a marathon through there is the worst thing that they could possibly do. And they've also shipped a lot of this trash down to be burned, 100 million
They're shipping
pounds.
all of it to Tokyo or Greater
Right.
Tokyo because that's where they have all the high-temperature furnaces.
Right, so the high-temperature furnaces are going to burn it, which is an international crime and should be stopped right now, because what they're doing is a process called averaging. They average the really heavy isotope with another not-so-heavy isotope batch and say, well, it's all averaged out, it's okay. And what they're doing is they're remobilizing it. Now, one of the things I noticed this evening, for the first time in a while, it happens every couple of weeks, is the radiation meter on my wife's bedroom dresser is down to the lowest I've seen since before March. But it's been up and down. And it's almost never below 50s or 60s. Tonight was down to like 22, which is kind of strange. And that concerns me for several reasons. Firstly, we know that the plant hasn't stopped, so either the radiation is tunneling and ready to blow, and it's somehow stopped, or they stopped some kind of activity that was interfering or causing it to have a massive release. But what we're going to see here is the syndrome that's going to occur in Japan. You'll see Japanese people not only in a kind of like a death wish, which is a mass psychological effect, is the people that are not wealthy, that haven't left to Shanghai. Apparently, a lot of the Japanese who are wealthier have already left the country. They've gone to California or Shanghai, or they've gone everywhere else. The regular population that are kind of the middle class or lower, they're just basically left in Japan to die, or they're told it's not a problem, don't worry. And so I dug up a bunch of articles, and I just wanted to read off a couple of them here. One of them was, some of these are actually almost humorous. They're so crazy. Let me just pull up a couple of them here, because when you read these, you say, they can't have written that. I mean, these are academics that are saying that, here it is, an assessment of radiation dosage as an educational institute 57.8 kilometers away from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant 1 month after the nuclear accident. Now, that's the title of the article. It's from Environmental Health Prevention Medicine, 2011, August 5th, by, these are Japanese people, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's Department of Hygiene and Preventive Medicine, Fukushima Medical University and School of Medicine in Fukushima. And, of course, their results were radiation dose rates and count rates were higher outdoors and indoors, a bright idea, and higher 1 centimeter above the ground surface than 100 centimeters. Radiation dosage 1 centimeter above the ground were higher on grass and moss than on asphalt and soil. The estimated radiation dosage for a student spending 11 hours on site at this educational institution was 9.8 microsieverts. Okay? Right? 9.8 microsieverts. Conclusion, environmental radiation dosage at the educational institute 57.8 kilometers from Fukushima Daiichi plant 1 month after the accident were lower than the national regulation dose for schools, 3.8 microsieverts per hour at most points. Differences in radiation dosages depending on outdoor surface properties are important to note for risk. But they don't even report what isotopes. They just talk about the number of counts. They don't talk about it's just ridiculous. This is not science. You Japanese scientists should be embarrassed. They have this honor code. Well, how about being honest? How about an honest code? And if you're listening in Japanese and you're hearing me rail at this, it doesn't matter. You're all our brothers and sisters over there in Japan, and this is obscene to treat the Japanese this way. Now, I want to mention while I'm seeing
you looked, excuse me, Bill, but you looked at the pictures of some of those little girl runners, 12, 14, 15.
It rips your heart out. It's terrible.
Absolutely. They're inhaling into the deepest part of their lungs radioactivity. It's going right into their body. They're going to die. When you hear microsieverts, folks...
Oh, they're going to die. They're going to die a horrible death. And they'll probably have a hematological syndrome where they'll develop some kind of a liver tumor or a blood cell tumor from the bone marrow, or they'll start getting major problems where they just won't go into their menarche. They won't go through the early stages to become a woman. They'll stop growing. And then they'll get CNS symptoms because their cortex will start dying from low-dose radiation exposure. If you expose someone to radiation over a period of time, the first thing that they act like they're decorticate. They're basically, it's like give them a very slow burn version of kuru or some disease that's going to chew away at your brain. Okay? Let me just read a couple of other things here. You know, some of these articles are amazing. It's just such a scientific whitewash. And then they talk about this article here, too, recently in Japan as well, concerned about antibiotic resistance due to the radiation. Now, the fact is, anybody that's involved with bioweapon development knows that cyclotrons and radiation exposure in an animal or human takes organisms that are pathogenic and soups them up to become major dangerous pathogens. Plus, it also makes them mutate so that a host that's under free radical stress stresses the bacterium or virus and makes it mutate and become antibiotic resistant, antiviral resistant, and becomes a pandemic pathogen possible. So,
well,
people need to realize this. So, this article here published recently in Environmental Science from in conjunction with Northern Ireland Public Health Laboratory. It's just another whitewash, trying to say, oh no, that's not considered a bioweapon.
All right, hold on just a second.
Another lie.
Yep, another endless. Be right back with Dr. Bill Deagle in just a minute. Okay, back with Bill, and we're talking about a lot of very important things. Remember, the United States, the formerly United States, I love to have fun with that one, took it real hard. This government will never admit to the amount of cesium and other radionuclides that came over here. They won't talk about isotope identification. It'll never happen. It doesn't necessarily restrict itself to the West Coast. So don't for a minute think that it's just the West Coast. It is not. Remember the cesium in the Vermont dairy milk in late March, early April? Whoops. Remember the recent counts hundreds of times over background in St. Louis rainwater? Okay, so you get the idea. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the other article here is actually published in what's called Dose Response, and this is the conjoined article from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association, and of course the was called the International Dose Response Society. And they basically, it's hard to believe what they said here. They thought that the people downwind of Fukushima Daiichi would actually induce protective effects that would reduce cancer rates. They don't talk about the dosage or the cumulative fact that these particles they don't just fade away like like a spark from a fire or a cinder.
Right.
They stay embedded in your tissues for decades, or long after your bones are in the ground for hundreds or thousands of years or longer. So these radioactive fleas, in a sense, embed and continue to generate like a death ray from the Death Star, like Star Wars, as long as they're in that tissue. And they will induce DNA damage, release methyl groups to activate oncogenes, turn off gene suppression or tumor suppression genes, and cause oxidative stress that can cause vascular or other problems. So it's not an equivalent model to talk about even the number of millisieverts per hour, because it doesn't tell you which isotope it is and how long it's going to have a half-life, and whether it's an alpha, beta, or gamma